Well, John Howard says the election results in the UK and the chaos of the upcoming presidential election in the US should remind Australians how lucky we are. Cautiously adding his voice to the future of Joe Biden's candidacy, the former Prime Minister, just a few years older than Biden himself, says it's an untenable situation. And Mr Howard spoke to Laura Jays from London, where the Conservatives have just suffered an historic election defeat.
Mr Howard, lovely to see you.
Great to see you.
What do you make of the results of this election and what it means for Conservative politics?
Well, it's obviously a disappointment for the Conservative Party, but you've got to guard against overanalysing election results. There's a pattern. After a party has been in power for more than a decade, it becomes increasingly hard to get re-elected. And that's the main reason I think people wanted to change. I don't think it represents a massive lurch in one direction or the other, although there are some very interesting features. I think it highlights the difference in results between a country such as Britain that has a first-past-the-post voting system and a country like Australia which has a preferential voting system.
Well, Labor has just won on a vote share of 34%. The Conservatives got 25%. They've seen a rise of these double-hating voters, rejecting both of the major parties. What is the central problem for major parties, do you think?
Well, I think they have some problems in common. One of them is they have believed for too long in the centrality, almost a monopoly of their role. I mean, one of the reasons why Britain persists with the first-past-the-post voting system is that it's more likely to produce, when they do win, a big majority.
This election also saw a rise in religious candidates. We saw pro-Palestinian candidates dent Labor's election victory, and on the other side you had Nigel Farage with a big anti-immigration message that saw a big surge in popularity for him. Do you think that kind of issue will become an issue in Australia?
Oh, look, I think we have to wait and see. I think it's always a good idea for political parties to appeal across the board. I mean, one of the things that I'm very proud of is that the Liberal Party that I led it had long since sort of put aside, as political parties generally in Australia, put aside any taint of sectarianism, and I think it's good that we have broadly based parties. Now, in the end, it depends on the policies, but I think any tendency towards single issue sectarian politics is probably not a good idea.
Keir Starmer seemed to be deliberately boring. He ran a small target strategy. He did as little as possible to squeak into power. It's hard to find a leader who will take a bold position and then advocate for it. Would you agree?
I don't think it's changed all that much. I think we once again have to understand the history of politics. And one observation I would make in the context of the Conservative Party now having to regroup and choose a new leader is that I think the choice of political leaders should be restricted to the members of Parliament, because the first responsibility of the leader of a political party is to lead the parliamentary party, and members of Parliament see their leader all the time. His first responsibility is to the people who elected him. I think the Conservative Party almost certainly would have lost this election even if they had not had so many leaders. I think people were getting a bit tired. But certainly they probably overdid it a bit.
On the point of bold policy, the Coalition's nuclear policy is a bold one. Is it the right one?
Look, I am a very strong supporter of the Coalition's nuclear policy. I think Peter Dutton has shown great boldness. It's the most definitive, not stand-alone, but certainly as compared with the Labor Party, it's a stand-alone policy, and it makes sense. And I applaud him, and I'll do everything I can to help him.
The only thing more explosive than British politics right now is potentially American politics. Do you think it is tenable for Joe Biden to continue in the race?
Well, it looks as though growing numbers of people don't think so. And I feel very strongly that if there's a message for Australia out of what we see in America, and that is that our political system, a parliamentary system, where the top man or woman, the Prime Minister, has to be a member of the legislature, in our case the Parliament, that's an infinitely better system than what the Americans have. I have no doubt that if the Americans had had a parliamentary system, Trump would not have got to the top of the Republican Party. No chance. And therefore would not have been president way back a few years ago. Not way back, but just a few years ago. And equally, I think if Biden had been the president, having got there in a parliamentary pathway, he'd have been tapped on the shoulder a couple of years ago and told that if he didn't resign, he'd be voted out. I think our system is much better. The Americans are not going to change theirs, and we're not going to change ours, but that doesn't mean that we can't speculate. And I think when you're getting polls suggesting that 60 to 70% of Americans wish the choice was otherwise, that's pretty significant.
The focus has all been on Joe Biden's cognitive ability, and we've seen that in the debate. We've seen him try and fix any concerns in subsequent interviews, and it seems to be getting worse. Does he have the abilities?
Look, all I can observe, and it's not for me to be so presumptuous, is to tell my American friends what they should be doing, but it doesn't stop me observing that there's growing worry about his capacity, and I think it will work its way towards a situation where it will be very hard for him to carry on. I think very hard indeed. And I think it does highlight that the imperfections of a presidential system of government. And I'm not talking here about republics versus monarchies, although my position on that's well known, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether you have a parliamentary system. And the great advantage of it is that somebody can't just leapfrog through populism into the role.
If you were still Prime Minister and you saw the cognitive decline and what has been on display from Joe Biden over the last couple of months, would you be concerned?
Look, I'm not Prime Minister, and I know Joe Biden not well. I like him, he's a decent man, he's had a great deal of personal tragedy in his life, and I suppose as a human being I feel for him, but you're talking about the most powerful position in the world, and it's very difficult when the likely choice will be between people whose cognitive capacity is under increasing inspection, let me put it that way, and somebody who, in the case of Trump, to use a cricket expression, would not leave the field when the umpire's finger went up.
Mr Howard, thanks so much for your time. It's been wonderful to talk politics with you here in London.
Thank you.